Maybe you can guess what it's about. It's probably about Elsa, which I've demonstrated during last harvest. But there I demonstrated Elsa as a separate application, and but I've always wanted to be able to integrate it into Orchard so that you can use Elsa Designer within the context of Orchard. So I did some, I resumed some work. I started it a couple years ago, I think, at least 1 year. And at the time it was Elsa, but it was the previous implementation of the designer of the Elsa Workflows engine. And then we moved to using a Blazor implementation, and that received a lot of work. And so I never gotten around to integrate it into as a module in Orchard. And I started to work on that. Also inspired based on conversations I had with people at Last Harvest. Yeah, I want to just do a quick show and tell. So for that, I will start with the code. Just briefly, just to show you the structure. So we have, I created a new module called Elsa Workflows. So this is basically the core, and then there's it's not proof of concept, but just a starting point for integrations with the Orchard framework and the libraries that come with the modules, such as content. So what you can do with this now is that there's now there's a feature, of course, it's called Elsa. It has core services and an optional feature, content activities. And that adds this menu item here, where we can now create workflows. And the nice thing about integrating with Orchard is that because Orchard, of course, has the concept of content items, which are versionable, exportable, etc. So a workflow definition in Elsa is its own entity, but through this module, it actually leverages content items. So in contrast to the built-in workflows module, where a workflow is just an entity, with this Elsa integration, it's actually a content item. So, that means it just receives all of the nice features it has, such as versionability and all the other goodies. And my last attempt was sort of working when integrating the designer, but there were some issues with Monaco editor, for example. But with this Blazor implementation, which is exposed as a custom element or component, it's very nice. It's very, very stable, I think. Let me get that out of the way. So for example, let's start with an easy one. Let's start with, actually, that's boring. Let's start with an Orchard integration. For example, these activities, they are provided by the contents module that I showed, this one, which allows you to do the obvious thing like handling events such as content published. For example, whenever an article is published, we can render a notification. So this is, of course, you can do this with the existing workflows module, but this designer and the Elsa engine adds a few more capabilities compared to the built-in workflows, and that's the entire point of this module to be able to leverage all that. But here I'll just stick to a simple example. For example, content published. Whenever an article is published, you want to capture the content item being published. So let's call that content item. And we don't have to strong type it, but it's convenient if we do, because that gives us IntelliSense when we use this variable elsewhere. For example, here, we want to say, for example, actually, we'll just do it like this. So here we can reference the workflow variable that I just created, content item of type content item. And because of its .NET typing, we actually get nice IntelliSense. So we can say content item dot display text. So that makes it easier for the user to or for the workflow designer to explore what's there. was just published. Okay, so this one is all set. So all we have to do is now just publish it. It also shows the versioning, and these are based on content item versions. So that's nice. So you can make changes and go back easily. Of course, I didn't make any changes here, but let's say we move this here, publish this. Then we can switch back and forth and restore all the versions. That is all built into the Elsa designer, but through this workflow, Orchard integration, it makes it actually easier. I copied originally a lot of concepts from Orchard into Elsa, and now it's nice to see how compatible that is. All right, so now let's say article. Let's publish this one. And then, oh, actually that didn't work. Why didn't it work? Tools, workflow instances. Oh, these are old versions. These are for my early attempts. I deleted the definitions, but clearly it still needs to delete the instances. But let me see if I can troubleshoot this quickly. Content publish, article. Should work. Let me just try a new one. Okay, well, I need to troubleshoot why I didn't publish the existing one. But here's just a simple proof of concept, because now with the Elsa Workflows Orchard integration, we can do all of the other things that we have, like, for example, when we look at the built-in workflow module, which has many events that we can use and tasks. And so my plan is to port all, or at least most of them, into this module, or I'll create separate modules depending on the domain here, and that should then bring Elsa capabilities into Orchard. And currently, it's stored in my own repo, but I'm planning on sending a PR to the Orchard contrib project so that we can all contribute to it, because I'm sure there will be other nice integrations that we can add. Anyway, that's a brief update on my end. There's still some work to do. As you notice, there's a few quirks. Other little things like, let's say you have, not this one, but here. Let's say you want to just execute a workflow. This is, of course, trigger based, but you can also create workflows like this. So, for example, we want to say, hello, Orchard. And then now when I press the play button, currently it will try to redirect, because that's a hard-coded behavior in the Blazor component of Elsa Studio. But obviously I want to be able to capture this event from using a bit of JavaScript. And then instead of redirecting what it's trying to do here, I would redirect to the created instance that we would see here. So that we don't have to manually click. So it's little things like that, but the foundation, I think, is quite solid at this moment. So yeah, I thought I would show you this, maybe gather some early feedback, and in the meantime, I will just continue adding more integrations and working through those quirks that I mentioned. That's it.
Thank you. I have a question.
Yes, please.
How is it integrated in the process? Is it the same process, or is it a different process?
Same process, and that's actually how Elsa was, or the main purpose of the Elsa Workflows library was so that you can integrate it and execute workflows in the same process. So if we look at program, it's just doing like, use Orchard core and add Orchard core. Similarly, well, actually, in this case, it's a module. So we go to the module, and then in its startup, it's going to add the Elsa services to the service collection, and then do all of the Elsa specific configuration. All of this could be cut up into separate modules. And as an example of that, there's the contents, Elsa Workflows contents module, which has its own startup. And here it's just adding additional activities. In this case, all the activities that it finds in this assembly, adding more. Well, in this case, the content handler, of course, so we can handle Orchard events and then trigger Elsa workflows. It's all in the same process, including even the API. So there's a class library called Elsa Workflows API, which exposes REST API endpoints through fast endpoints, which is hosted in this same process. So that made sure I didn't have to repeat all of that logic.
Then, and all the storage is using what? Yes, SQL also, or did you
the same exactly.
Database?
So yeah, so it's really up to the user what they want to use, but I provided Yes SQL implementation. So we have a Yes SQL implementation for the definition store. So it implements the interface from the Elsa framework, where everything is abstracted away behind the interfaces. And that made it super easy to just implement a Yes SQL provider here. So I'm injecting an iSession. Of course, I have the things like indices, migrations, all of those standard Yes SQL and Orchard things. And that's super cool. So all the storage is here. But because it's abstracted away, it's also just as easy to store all of your workflow executions separately from the definitions or together in a separate database. It's very granular in that sense.
And can you show us the Fluent endpoints, how you use them?
Yeah, so there's no endpoints to be seen
fast
here.
Fast endpoints.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so that lives in a library called Elsa Workflows API. So that's just a NuGet package, which is exposed here through this call here. So here we have configure async to configure the application builder, where I'm calling an extension method called map workflows API, which is exposed by that NuGet package. So I can show you the source code, of course, of those fast endpoints, which basically looks like this.
I know about the library. I've never used it.
It's pretty cool. It's so elegant. I will show you one quick example. For example,
so recently we moved some controller views to endpoints to minimal APIs.
Yeah, that's the same principle. It's nice because you have focused classes, just a single responsible, a class responsible for a single concern. So it keeps the classes minimal in terms of code. But it basically looks like this. You just create a class and then inherit from endpoint. And I have a base class here, but that ultimately implements or it derives from endpoint with mapper. And there's a bunch of base classes provided by the fast endpoints library.
How do you manage security with that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question.
And does it work with Orchard? Or if because you exposed it, anyone can run a workflow, create a workflow?
Yeah, so what I did, and that's another piece of thing that I will refine, but for now it works as follows. So I have it here. Security permissions claims provider. So I use a claims provider, which by the way only gets invoked if OpenID is enabled. So I added a dependency on that. Maybe there's a way without the dependency on OpenID, but for now, what happens when this executes, I add a permissions claim, which is expected by the fast endpoints library. And then I just add a wildcard for now. But this I want to refine so that we can map it to Orchard security permissions, so that depending on those permissions, it can be mapped in some way. I have to think it through some more. But for example, here in the list endpoint of workflow definitions, it requires workflow definitions read permission. So it's either you have an asterisk, which means you have all permissions, or you could have a string of individual permissions. And I'm gonna revisit this such that we can have hierarchical permission. So that you could say some users have only read access, but maybe others have write access, and that would imply read access. But maybe some users, you just want to give them not all access to all of the resources, but just workflow definitions, both read and write, so that you don't have to include all of these individual permission strings. But yeah, I still need to figure that out in more detail.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other people have questions?
This looks good, Sipka. Great job.
Thanks, Mike.
I also have a couple of questions. Yes. So do you intend to integrate with the Orchid core permissions then?
Yes, actually, let me reshare just to make it easier to show. There is integration with that currently on the controllers. So of course I have MPC controllers that the menu item links to. So here we have the edit controller and list controller, and this is integrating with standard Orchid core permissions. And there's just one permission currently called manage workflow. But I'm going to look for a way where we can add more workflow specific permissions, such as the ability to manage workflow definitions, view workflow instances, delete them or not, those kinds of things, and then try and see how I can map that to Orchid permissions, and then map that to the fast endpoint permissions so that they are linked. And then, and of course, it works differently because Orchid core doesn't look at the user claims, I don't think. Maybe it does, I'm not sure, but the fast endpoints library does. And if it turns out to be too messy, ultimately what we can always do is just refactor the fast endpoints implementation where all of the logic gets moved to mediator handlers, for example, and then we could repeat those endpoints as native Orchid core controllers or MPC controllers, and then reuse the logic through those handlers. But that would be not so favorable as I think, because that does require a lot of code repetition. But at the same time, it might be nice because then it's natively integrated into Orchid in terms of permissions. So
I think
we have options.
This one permission is a good start. I think something like this would be required, and I think beyond that is nice to have. I would also have the same question as Jasmine. You have shown that it uses YesSQL. I presume that also means that it gets the DB connection from Orchid core, right?
Yeah, that's. Yeah. I mean, it's this iSession, so it's whatever.
It's the session.
Gets registered.
Okay.
Yeah, then, exactly.
Then I guess it also supports multi-tenancy, so it stores everything in the tenants tables.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And even more, so that this is true for workflow instances, activity execution records, etc. And for workflow definitions, it uses the higher level iContent manager to store, publish, delete, etc. workflow definition. Of that, I have a service called the workflow definition publisher, which implements Elsa's workflow definition publisher, but it uses the content manager to publish and unpublish workflow definition content items.
Awesome. And one last question. Is there any Elsa feature that's not working within Orchid core?
I have to do a lot of experimentation. One of the next things I will be trying out are the timer-based triggers, such as the cron, a trigger, delay, timer, and start at. Those in the Elsa framework rely on Quartz.net or Hangfire, or the built-in one, which is just memory-based, a custom implementation. but I want to see what Orchard itself has in terms of timer-based events and integrate with that. Or I will add a module that basically repeats what I have in Elsa or uses what I have in Elsa. But those features I have to try out. But so far, I haven't come across any features that don't work. But there might be some of them. I haven't tested all of the features yet. But one of the features which I personally like a lot is the following that should just work is composability. So instead of having these huge complicated diagrams or flowcharts, you can now create a container. That's just one example of a composable activity. So this is just an activity that doesn't do anything except for schedule whatever you add to its body. And then here you can add, I don't know, write line or send an HTTP request, etc. Or use this one. There's two flavors for some of those activities where you can add additional logic, but as a composed or an embedded activity. So you can go multiple layers deep in order to organize your flowchart more cleanly. So those more advanced features, they just work today.
Okay. So it seems to me that really probably the most important one would be the timers, because I would presume that's something that people use.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the most useful things of to be able to schedule jobs, implement those workflows. So that's going to be one of the next things I'll be trying out and adding a separate module for, I think, or I might add it to the core module. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it's you could use Orchard Course Timer, but probably it's not useful. So rather go the other way around.
Okay, sure. I'll explore the option just to get familiar with it, and probably I will add Quartz support, Hangfire, maybe later, and or maybe the built-in timer, which works well for single node hosting. As soon as you start hosting this in a cluster, you will want to use Quartz.net or the Hangfire provider for those schedule-based, timer-based activities. But sure, I'll look into those next.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you, Sitka.
You're welcome.